And
well, in this case, it's just an asset to help you later on. It doesn't fix the problem. Mm-hmm. It's it could be an asset or it could be a blessing.
Right.
So temporary or whatever. But no, I definitely see what you're saying.
Right. I'm not
that.
saying it's bad necessarily, but I am saying there's a dark side to that whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. In Troll Babe, you're talking about a definite limited resource in terms of your rerolls. You don't have endless rerolls. You have to check stuff off for those.
Right.
And if you start using relationships for them, you're putting people at risk. You actually are going to hurt your relationships.
Right.
One of the elements of a game like the Pool or Troll Babe or the Mountain Witch, for that matter, is that although there is a distinct currency of the way points, dice, talking, and so on all shift into one another, there's very little strategizing that you can do. There are consequences.
Okay.
There's no real optimal approach. People have pretended that people have talked about, well, in the pool, isn't it better just to always bet your whole pool every time? Statistically, you can't do worse than that. Or no, statistically, everything else is worse than that. So why don't you got to keep your pool high. So you just make sure you throw that in every time. What they're failing to recognize is that not all conflicts are equal.
Right.
And that there are things for which you might say, even if there is, I would rather risk a lower chance of success this time than risk losing them all. There's other things going on in this situation, in this scenario, and I'm not really willing to get rid of that biggest, that big thing through chance at the moment. Like you just discovered, you rolled 6 dice and not a 1 came up. That can happen. The pool is particularly fun for, people nailing everything, and they get kind of flush with it, and they're like, all right, here we go. I'm going to kick this thing's ass. And you're like, no, you didn't. And they're like, my whole pool. And you're like, your whole pool. And, or somebody has a bad bounce in the very first roll. And then that's great because that means that's where they're coming from for the rest of the session. Right? So what I'm trying to say is that there's consequences to systems like this for anything you do.
Right.
And so it's it is fascinating too because it feels like a strategic gamble and it feels like playing the odds and it feels like being all strategic about the whole thing. But the fact is there's no optimal strategy. There's only what you want to do with this problem that's in your face.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about with grains in your game. Because at first glance, the graininess is about the same as the pool.
Okay.
But it's not.
It's less grainy than the pool?
It is more coarse-grained than the pool. It is more abstract, if that's the word we would use. And it's not because the scale of event relative to a roll is any different.
Okay.
That's not why. The reason is that there's less consequence for how you have chosen to handle this mechanically.
Okay.
When there's more consequence for how you've chosen to handle it mechanically, the sense of immediacy and the sense of individual actions mattering. You see, it doesn't matter whether you narrate exactly how you managed to kill it or blast it with magic or whatever. It doesn't matter whether you're narrating it before or after the roll, as long as it is put into place and the final narration will finalize it, perhaps. But as I keep pointing out in our Lamentations of the Flame Princess game, I narrated each sword strike and each arrow after the results.
Yes.
And so I narrated how the attack was made after the roll each time.
Right.
And I made a certain point to do that because there's no other way to make D&D combat fun. And so and when you do it, everything becomes extremely vivid and everybody got really excited about, wow, look at us fight, These wolves are terrible. These things are scary. Oh my God, I can't believe I pulled that off. And they completely forgot that they had not narrated that action all the way up to completion, and then we rolled for completion. We didn't do that.
Right. No.
So what I'm trying to say is that when you have consequential mechanics of the kind that we're talking about with the pool, that your raw meat for the right narration is very clear.
Okay.
And even in that game, no metric at all for degrees of success. It doesn't matter how many ones you get.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many dice you rolled. Nothing of that has anything to do. The urge to look at a pile of rolled dice and then find 8 metrics that you can, okay, I got 3 3s, so that means that I must have jumped over the thing. And okay, wait, no, I got a match. I got a 4. Let me look up on a 4 on the table on the 4. Okay, I got a 4, so that means all that shit. Nothing. And so it's the integration of the talking the points, the dice, and the fact that you had to make your little construct of them that time. And that every particular construct that you did each time will have its own impact on the architecture of your character.
Okay.
So therefore, there's the easy architecture. If you didn't gamble any pool dice, then the pool stays as is. If you did gamble pool dice, take it back. If you succeed and don't take the monologue, you will get +1 to your pool, even if you didn't gamble any.
Right.
If you succeed and take the monologue, the pool stays the same. If you fail, the pool either stays the same because you didn't gamble any, or the pool loses the gambled dice. So there are, no matter what, the architecture either survives or fails to survive. Or in one way.
Well, and I think too, as we're talking, reminds me of the idea that there's no point to having a conflict if the conflict doesn't have some sort of significance.
Well, another way to look at it is that we roll to see whether you fail. Right, comes from that seminar. We don't roll for success. Right. We roll to see if you fail.
You fail.
Yeah.
Right.
So what does that mean? We can't play unless we know what we're rolling for. Oh, I'm rolling to hit. No. You're rolling to fail.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Yep.
Right. And so, good, you didn't fail. Aren't you happy? That didn't happen. Fantastic. Right. It doesn't mean you have to totally pre-narrate it. In fact, I'd prefer people didn't. Yeah. It does mean that we have some idea of just what's going to come down on you when you fail.
Yes, and you will.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I feel is missing here, is that sense of that sense of architecture of the decision I make in the moment for how to use the numbers I've got, how I talk. And once I've done it, what's changed on the sheet? I look at my troll babe, and that's been checked off, and that's been checked off. I can't use those anymore in the adventure. I've got less rerolls now. And I ended up being injured in that particular exchange. But I won. I won that exchange, but I got injured along the way.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So it is, I think, kind of important to recognize that when you have whatever changes those are. Oh, and in the case of the pool, don't forget the larger, softer architecture about whatever on earth it is you're going to write after all this.
That's true.
And that's certainly going to be coming very directly. It may not feel direct, but it does come directly from what happened in the session. The way you look at your guy, the way that, right?
Right. Well, and that's definitely what the scroll mechanic for the characters is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. This is history of your character. which bore out of the idea that because the idea that character, how do you decide if a character lives or dies? Well, why don't we just say that after 12 notations on their scroll, it doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, you get to decide that for yourself, but their moment in history is just gone.
Right, they're done.
So, yeah, they're done. And you have me rethinking this too, the idea that if they decide ultimately at the end of the day to not put themselves against the big bad, whatever the big bad for the session is, they don't get to write anything in their scroll because history has sort of forgotten their.
Well, you've got a couple of contradictory notions there. Number one is that means a character who doesn't do shit gets played forever.
Gets played forever, right? Exactly.
Number two, let's consider the game Shock, in which you have a certain amount of oppositional dice for the game master who uses them up, right? But I'm trying to remember how it works, but there was some metric. And if you ran out of that metric, you used up that many of points or got that many points, I can't remember what, but something like that, some counted metric. You got to a certain number and the game just has to close out. The system itself says, for God's sake, if you don't have enough to close things out now, then screw you. Come up with, think about what's going on, close it out. It's not going to have any more conflicts. The character can't do any more about it. Close out the way it should happen at this time.
Right.
But what's also important is that when you get about halfway there, then somebody, I can't remember whether it's the game master or everybody or what, but somebody is able to do that at any point thereafter.
Okay.
At the end of any conflict. So every conflict at the end of that, if it is, satisfyingly, fictionally the kind of thing where somebody says, that should end up play.
Right.
Then you do it. So Shock basically says, keep going for a little while. You got to have some sequence of, conflicts. But after that, any one of these can just close it out.
Yeah.
And after a certain number of those, the game says, oh, for God's sake, quit messing around. It's over.
Right.
So do you see the difference between that and what you just said about how you have to get to the 12?
Yes.
Right. And it's in some ways, one could even say, okay, this isn't a suggestion. This is just spitballing using the variables that we're talking about, written in items on the scroll. Okay, as a metric, very similar to Shock's, although done in a different way, as these phrases. So let's say you say, okay, after you have 3 of these, then the next one can be your character's last at any time. Right. So from now on, if you have an adventure that you say, you know what, my character steps off the stage. That was my character's heroic history. And they may live or die or whatever. I don't care.
Right.
But also, after we get to, I don't know, 6 or something, history's had enough of you.
Right.
And we are done. That is your last one. I don't know if that could be randomly determined. That could be a fixed number. I don't care. That's not important to me. But do you see the logic at work there? So now it depends if you want there to be some kind of structural consequence to not taking the bait, then say, okay, you used up one.
Right.
You made your...
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right? So if your character does nothing like this many times, well, I guess you were incidental. I guess, your character... Guess what? You avoided conflict successfully. Congratulations.
Yeah,
right?
That makes more sense. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Now, I'm not suggesting that precise set of mechanics, but that's the logic I'm trying to demonstrate.